So, warmly welcome to this month's session of Divaa and Ishq. And today we have the honor of hosting our lovely Indigo Rose. And I think, if you don't mind, Indigo, I'll just start with a brief introduction of you and feel free to add anything you feel is right afterwards, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
So, Indigo is a true explorer of life's vast horizons. She embraces the beauty of identity's ever-evolving tapestry. She's a teacher of joy. She's devoted to nurturing young minds through the sheer magic of joy-infused education. She's also a spiritual seeker. She's a believer in the profound power of love, even amidst the depths of life's challenges. Indigo is a channeler of words. She has a unique connection to channeled writing, and she weaves wisdom and inspiration into her journey. Indigo is also an art enthusiast, an artist at heart. She indulges fully in life's diverse colors and experiences. And last but not least, she's a global voyager. She's a woman who traverses the globe. She's constantly reinventing herself, forging unexpected connections under ever-changing skies.
I would say that's a pretty good summary. And I'm not sure.
Mashallah, that's an abundance of different matters.
Yeah, it is. I feel like I am in a process of, again, rebirthing myself, because reality is always changing. I think that's the demand of the reality we live in these days. Yeah. So I'm glad to be here. And I thank you all for holding this space and inviting me. I'm not sure what the process and procedure is, but I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. And there's really no formal script to this. It's basically a tavern where we meet and marvel at the different facets of life. And that's exactly today's topic, is the soul tapestry, because you yourself, as a master weaver of different parts of life, we just basically take joy in talking with you today, and to share anything that comes to mind from your journey, to the questions that maybe the sisters have. And usually we also have a little session of penning towards the end. So there's no strict structure.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, maybe a little bit more about myself. I was born in the United States and was born to a family of travelers, and ended up in Iran, and was on the last plane out before the embassy. At this, I'm so dating myself here. Sorry, I'm old. If that's just how it is. And then later grew up in Saudi and on the East Coast, and then went back to the States with by the time I was 14, I'd moved 32 times. So that's a different, I think, frame of reference. In a interracial family, and then ended up moving to a little village in New Hampshire, and then tried my hand at being an American, and tried to figure out what that meant. And so I've had a lot of journeys with identity, having grown up in sort of an uncommon way, and then later called back to the Gulf, and having lived in Dubai, and several spiritual awakenings later, and then being drawn across the globe to Egypt many times, and Nigeria and Turkey, and then some travels. And so Yeah, it's been a lot, and now I feel like there's so many projects emerging, but with a great deal of spiritual warfare involved in my lifetime. So it's been an exciting but interesting but traumatic life. And yeah, yeah, it just feels like the longer I step into this process, the clearer the lens becomes, if that makes any sense. And so the fact that I'm sitting here in a space connected to Alicia, which was for sure a very interesting connection in finding that and um, channeling so many different collectives over time. And then nausea, which is just I sort of can't believe that in a way, since it's so many different connections that led to that. So yeah, it's life is miraculous in a lot of ways.
It's lovely to have you here, Indigo, and it's amazing how we've connected and it's come to a necessary sort of circle. I'm on the road and I don't know how clear my sound is, or how you all, if you could hear me or not, but I just want to just give this little sort of gratitude note here to say we're so happy to have you here. And we look forward to this natural unfolding of this collective, this space where we would love to hear from you as to what is being channeled to and through you, to share these divine codes of wisdom to our collective of, women, females here who gather on the note of love and mystery.
I think that's a really great question. What's coming through for me right now is I'm doing a lot of projects around this concept of the sacred divine feminine. And in this world that is such a challenge, with the frequency of so many things that are asking us to be something else, there becomes this call to perhaps the next sacred identity, because I'm one who always leans towards extremes, and that's been part of my journey, is the sacred, the profane, the mundane, and I do everything to the extreme and live in that, or have, at least that's been my style across my life, to explore these types of things. And now it becomes this growing importance of us stepping into this sacred feminine leadership. And I think there's a lot of that that's coming through in a really important way to build that capacity among women, in meaningful ways, that allow them to cross the bridge, so to speak, of this idea that we're divinely designed, and the closer we can get to that energy, then the closer we get to being in communion with the divine, in communion with divine collectives, in communion with all of the energies that we're heading towards. And I could speak about this for a long time, because I have a tendency of channeling a lot of really big energies across really huge timelines. And then I channel a lot of different collectives, both dark and light, which is sort of terrifying, especially when I first started channeling the darker side. It was really, really scary. But what I would say is that there's a huge demand, a huge need, because it's the women that are working with the children. And in general, that energy needs that nurturing, that allowing, all of the energy that's very feminine needs to be brought back in a very strong way. And I feel like my role in that, really, I'm working on a lot of projects around that. And I know that there's such a huge collective of people doing this work. But for certain, we're leading the divine masculine energies also on the planet. And so bringing that in is important. Yeah, I think that's the best way for me to talk about that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm just, curious as a new mom myself, like, do you feel called more to work with the kids straight up, or are you working with the caregivers? Because it's always the dyad, at least in the beginning, of the mom and baby, and then soon, of course, the kid is more merging with the rest of society as well. So change has to happen on so many levels.
Yeah, and I think there's a necessity. So the more I go on, and I spent 23 years working with children directly, and I've also spent a lot of time working with adults. And children are interesting because the strategies with children and the way we've looked at things traditionally over time have been to meet a certain demand in the world, that reality was a very fixed place. And so this fixed mindset is sort of part of our traditional structures. And now there's all of this like clearing, and you see these like I'm gonna say, I hate to say it, but like false light workers that are like, we're clearing the energy here, we're clearing the energy here. And I'm like, you're clearing the energy for globalism and not pinning down like foundational principles that need to still remain, right? Like, and so then you get mad that now Bali is like invaded by crazy juice bars, but that's because when you were busy doing all that work in Bali, you didn't actually pin down the essential things that needed to remain. And so I think there's a piece of this which goes into like really strong foundational principles. And I think when you're asking who to work with, that's kind of where I'm torn right now, because all of my projects that I'm working on cover so many different demographics, right? So I have one that's for that I'm working on that's for women, and stepping into the role and like creating this identity or new avatar of what is priestessing and what are the fundamental pieces of priestessing, which is basically stepping into your sacred self, right? And so it becomes this piece of so that's for like the self piece of that. And then there are other pieces where I'm like, oh my gosh, these kids need guidance. They don't know even how to step into the world, or helping mothers understand, how do you teach your children to be critical thinkers and decision makers with and without. And so there's so many different levels of this that I'm drawn to. I don't know how to kind of pick a population, because I think there's so much need at this point, particularly as technology races forward, that ability to really work out of your intuitive self becomes important. And so maybe it's the adult women that have children that I should be thinking about, or those that will have children, because that's our only hope, right? I really feel that right now. I feel there's a lot of need on the planet and the level of tension and false templates that need to fall, and true authentic templates that are coming in from higher sources need to be solidified. And I feel like we're in that process right now. We're right at the beginning of that process, but there's so much work that has to be done. And so when you're asking me what population I should work with, I feel I'm not sure. You know, I'm right now I'm taking care of my father, who is extremely, like, a very distorted patriarch, but my mom passed away. I'm taking care of my father, and so I spend a little time in a bookstore, and I have so many kids that come in now, kids, adults, and they're all looking for help. And so in different ways, like the kids are like, we want guidance, and the adults are like, we want you to guide our kids. And then the adults are like, wait, we need learning platforms that make sense to us and that are real and authentic and are not asking us to not be focused on the things we're not focused on. I mean, that's half the strategy of like the darker agenda, right? Is this concept of trying to take you away from your true authentic being, and not to trust uh what you're bringing in. And so much of that is like, how, okay, so there's the role of like, how do you free shackles? How do you also, as people are freeing shackles, they're also raising small people. And so there's a lot of, it's just such a complex thing. And then on top of it, the economic demands of like, and so many parents aren't home with their kids. And so who's filling that place of that? And so it becomes a real challenge. Like at one point I figured, because it's very powerful to work in a classroom and have the kind of effect on 26 kids that walk away at age 6 or 7 or 8, knowing things like, okay, so there are distortions, and sometimes I'm going to know a lot more than my parents, and that's just the truth now. So that's one of the flips that has happened in our society, is that kids are always going to know more technologically than the adults will. So then it becomes, okay, so the delivery system becomes like this decision-making process, and how do you integrate your intuition and your sense of danger and your sense of self-protection and your sense of making good choices in this rapidly changing world. And I think there's so many questions about that, because I don't think it's just kids that need that. I think it's everyone that needs that, because the change is first and second order change, and it's happening so quickly. I don't know if that answers the question at all.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I mean, it's I feel a lot of what you're saying in just realizing how there's almost some kind of a mass awakening to the generational trauma, and kind of like a revolution of reawakening into ancient knowledge that's happening on many levels and in many geographical places right now. And I also feel like, yeah, it's a crucial, I mean, I guess it's always a crucial point for humanity, but I do feel it is a crucial point right now.
Yeah, and I think that I keep thinking about education, because I was in it for such a long time, and how our educational system has been built for the industrial age, not for the needs of the age of information. And as we head into AI, it just becomes more complex, and this concept of non-individualized types of structures. And I just keep thinking of how to ground what I know so that other people can like use it. I think that's a really hard piece, because I spent 23 years studying how to make that happen. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not as successfully, but and yesterday I was talking to someone about the concept, like always at the end of the year, I ask my kids, what did you learn? What's your big takeaway this year? And they'd say things like collaboration or love or humor, or, and I always love that that was their takeaway, as opposed to like, well, now I know how to read and math and resilience, you know, these kinds of things that are qualities that help build capacity for creation. So like, according to academic research at this point, the highest level thinking is creation. And obviously with all of these amazing tools and things that are coming out, there's so much to be used for the dark side and the light side. And it's a lot. And trying to maximize that and guide larger populations into understandings around that. When people are still working with these ancient fixed mindsets. And I'm not going to say ancient, because when you're talking about ancient, you're talking about original codes that came in, right? And so I've spent a lot of time spiritually tracking, if you will, meaning that I keep getting called to all of these ancient cultures to be decoding these spiritual systems, right? And it's all of this concept of like, so the original codes came in, and probably the best way of seeing those is in like religions that still exist, like Ifa. And then you see how that translates across the African continent and then moves into Egypt. And then we have the mother of civilization, and then how those structures kind of built out and then covered the Mediterranean, and going at least through that particular that lens. And I would say that's the one that I'm most, and then all the way up into like Abrahamic, the tree, and then into, you know, Islam. And then, but it's shifting now, right? So there's this whole other need where we can't be caught in the linguistic structures of things as much. And it really truly becomes like stepping into divine truth, because we're stepping into the quantum. And if you look all the way back at Ifa, that's just a digital system. It's the haves and have-nots. It's a binary system. And what we're stepping into is beyond that at this point. And we have to be flexible enough. I always think of it, I was watching a program on quantum mechanics and how these new quantum computers work. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly how I channel. Like, and it was just amazing to me to think like, we're all just these disco balls, not these unifaceted, you know, one-dimensional types of things. We have to be able to move and connect on so many different levels. But how to teach that, that's a challenge. That's a challenge. And how to help people become present enough to practice that, when reality, everything in reality is pushing most people to inherently want to reject that. It's hard. I mean, I feel like this is one of the biggest challenges, right? Like when you're talking about awakenings, that's always the question. Like I keep asking myself, am I here to guide people across the bridge into awakening, or am I just helping the people who've already awakened? And so that becomes a challenge. And I don't feel like I've defined that role at all, but the more work I do, the more I seem to find that it's people who have the need, that are expressing the need, that I'm drawn to. So where that leads, I don't know.
Indigo, I had a question, and that is those individuals who are working with kids, with children, teens, you know, young people. What do you say about those who are not healed and being such an impact and influence? A lot of our adults are messed up because of parents that were unhealed, educators, that, you know, all the reinforcers that we're all contributors to the confused adult. What about, you're saying now it's about, you know, the children, but then what would you recommend those who are intending to work with or have children of their own for their healing journey? Because not everyone, I think, should be around children or have children.
And
Right? Because you're just,
I agree with you. I think about that all the time. And that was one of my biggest challenges. I worked at many schools that were the highest risk populations. And I've also worked in mental health and in the prison system and volunteered with like dual diagnosis adult males that are like the worst of the population, like they're addicts while being mentally ill, while, you know, and understanding, overstanding all of that trauma and the generational trauma and what it can look like if somebody is not able to pull out of it. And that still there's like reproducing occurring of that, obviously, is a huge thing. And that's happening in, and I can say this knowing that this is happening at the highest levels of society, and it's happening at the lowest, and it's happening everywhere. And because systemically we're still working with old systems that are ineffective. And until that is reformed, then that is for sure a huge problem. But there's a level of consciousness that I think has probably been, and this is a very direct answer to that, because in the sense that that's going to happen, we all know that we had those teachers that were inspiring for some reason, and the ones that did massive damage. And anyone who's gone to school understands that that exists. And there's a piece as people are raising children, which is this understanding that allowing them to be conscious that sometimes they're going to know more than the adults around them. And they have to trust that. And they have to know what they know. And also teaching them all the strategies of being able to hold space for other people and to be able to collaborate and problem solve. But the consciousness that the people around them as adults, as much as they have to show respect, and teaching them how to do that while acknowledging that that person might be damaged and that's not about them, is important. And how to do that, I don't know. I've spent years doing that with children. And I think there's a valuable place in teaching those things. But the thing is, the person that is delivering that wisdom to children has to be healed and has to know how to teach that. At least in that, you know, that as a teaching point, that's really high level compassion. And so when I first started my journey with teaching, it was really learning that, like, wow, in violent criminals, the one thing they're all missing is empathy. So what are the primary things that every child needs to learn? Well, they need to learn respect, responsibility, and empathy. And then those framing out what they believe are human rights and what they believe are, I mean, all of those things are the underpinnings of how they move forward into the world. And so when they really understand that rules exist to maintain whatever these rights are, these intrinsic rights, well, then let's have lots of those conversations, and then understand that not everybody's walking on the same page with that. Is really important. And also understanding that there might be people in their family that don't necessarily honor those things. And how do you navigate that? And I think I think about my classroom meetings where I would sit with kids and they would just sit and talk about it, and then helping them process that, okay, so you might know more and you know more, but you don't have to say that you know more. You can just sit and hold that space and try to understand what that other person's going through, which is really hard when people are going through abusive situations. So I think there's several levels to that question because of people's context. And so there's a lot of training in that, because a lot of the stuff that is coming up with technology and the critical thinking required to make those decisions isn't just critical thinking. A lot of it's intuitive thinking, and that's not taught in schools, not traditionally. And that's part of the transformation that needs to happen. Supposedly it's supposed to be coming from the home. But we're evolving so quickly right now that not everybody has those skills. And I think of all the work I had to do devoted to that work. And I'm like, parents coming in and they don't have I've got like 60 kids to work with every year that I'm like, doing the work with. And, the number of times in a day that I'm doing those practices. So really a lot of the thing is how to refine that. Like, how do I deliver that information to people? Because it is so important. Parents are in this spot where their children are going to know more about technology than they do. And there's dangerous stuff out there. And there's, just as the light network is spreading, so is the dark. And so it becomes a very important thing for children to be able to self-monitor. And so teaching those skills. And I think of how I look at the number of adults on a daily basis that can't self-monitor, and they're still looking for external stuff. And so it goes back to, here are those wounds. So if I were, and I'm doing this all the time, trying to figure out the guiding principles so I can deliver it. And then how do you deliver that? Because there really are guiding principles behind all of these things. And I think to identify those things is what I work on all the time. That's what I'm constantly working on.
So you've been working within the system for 30 years. You haven't given up on the system because the system has failed countless human beings. So you're saying, what do you say to those who have come out of the system wrecked and disappointed?
I don't know.
Is there hope?
I don't know that I'm saying that I buy into the system at this point. What I'm saying is that the system as it exists, and that has nothing to do. So understand that my journey was extremely, extremely guided, and not by my own ambition or fault at all. And I know that. I know that I was divinely guided into all of the places that I was put because I wasn't strategic or smart enough. And so the fact that I was put into places to enact practices that, I mean, I've learned more about the darker side of the system in the last few years, because I had been isolated in a very beautiful bubble of being able to do the work that I was doing. And I didn't even know the way the rest of the system worked. Now that I'm stepping into the space of understanding the way it generally works, my level of cynicism is certainly very high. And which is why, like, then I feel like, okay, well, I can't complain about it. I have to create a new system. So that's exactly what I've been doing, is trying to create new models that work like outside of the industrial Aristotelian categories of like, this is what learning is. because learning is so much more. And we all know that, right? But the old system is not built around anything like that. So I guess when you're asking me the question, I think I'm still stuck on the part where okay, am I really bought into the system? No, definitely not. Am I a believer that the system is able to change? I'm a little skeptical because right now, having seen it on a very global level, there has to be a change, and how that works, I'm not sure. Is there hope? Absolutely, because I don't think there has to be hope, because I wouldn't have had my journey and I wouldn't know the things I know. So do I believe there's hope? Yes. Do I have any idea how that's going to play out? No. And I keep thinking, and I was in Abuja when COVID was hitting Asia. I was in Nigeria, and we were studying Brene Brown's Dare to Lead book as a staff in our off time. And I kept saying to those women, I said, I predict there's going to have to be a huge transformation in education. And they kept saying, oh, no, no, no. And I said, no, it's coming. And I feel that. And so I feel like that's the hope. Unfortunately, we're in a place where for most people, and this is becoming globalized, it's dual income households without time. And so I think that's the biggest challenge at this point, is that if there are to be these new structures, how they come through. And for the last 2 years, I keep hearing like, you won't have to do this alone. This is not going to be alone. You're going to, there's going to be a shift. But when that happens, how that happens, I'm not totally sure. But I think some of the questions you've asked around, like, we have traumatized people teaching more trauma, is a really big thing. And I don't think it's bad for traumatized people to be teaching if there are structures in place where they acknowledge that trauma and there are solutions for like how to work that out and how to acknowledge that and how to make that like a healthy part of the process, because that is part of the process too, is that we are all coming out of this. And so part of that process is, what are those structures that need to be in place as we are coming out of this, as we're doing this work and acknowledging, yes, I'm healing this, and this is how we solve that. And that's a really important piece too. And that really goes back to, like, I think about when I was in the classroom and having to acknowledge, what my role and responsibilities were with kids, but the kids were very aware that I was on level with them, right? Like, I'm here to guide you, but I'm on level with you. I'm an authority in the sense that I have to maintain order, but when it comes down to it, like, if you have a problem with me, I need you to tell me that. But I think that's a whole skill set too, right? And so that's when we get into the ego and we start talking about, well, how do we create these structures where people actually have to heal enough to defeat their ego? These are hard questions. And for me, I'm always going to say it goes back to a different level of education. I don't feel like I'm answering anyone's questions well.
No, I feel you totally are. There's so much coming out of these, reflections, and I personally could go on asking you stuff for a long time, but I know your time is precious, and I was wondering if there's anyone from our other ladies here who are present now who would have questions to pose or something to comment. You can just unmute yourselves if you have something popping up.
I'll come in. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for all your journeys. And the journeys that Shay and Indigo has gone through and delved into and evolved from there. God help, there's grace in all of it. And it's not an accident. I think it was your stint in Nigeria, was it? That was really intense at that moment. But you were doing a lot of work then.
Yes.
And yeah. So it's very volatile, but because you're meant for this. You're meant for this. And again, it's big, like what you shared, and it requires a collective that is in sync, that will create that web of light, the innate faith of it. And like how you shared with regards to the shocks, the traumas, everyone's facing it. The COVID thing was leading a lot of, again, it's the shock. So when a child is being beaten up, right, the child needs to process the which the adult is not aware of. There's the body is shaken, you need to process, and not many people are aware of this wisdom, let alone the parents. They don't know there's time and there's empathy, there's times, there's sequences to weave in that, within the child's body. Now you're talking about a whole collective being impacted in all levels of scales on COVID. Everyone is shocked. So, and again, that's coming into the shocks that they had as a child, the shocks that they're having now is such a play. But at the end of the day, where I feel the possibility of coming in is, again, to acknowledge, to allow everyone to speak about that shock. This is the voicing. The voicing is the healing, to speak about it. And like you shared, to have that empathy and for people, because again, if you observe it after COVID, either people just move on, there's the other side who just go innate into their reflections of their being. Others are just like, oh, as if it never happened. But clearly everyone had the shock that nobody dealt with properly.
I think,
So
yeah, that's a beautiful insight, is that really is a reflection of how people work. Like, this trauma happens and then we're supposed to repress it and go back to normal. And I feel like that's such the model in so many homes. And that's literally what's happening on the planet right now. And we're going to pretend like this horrible force that came through and literally shifted reality in this huge way didn't happen. And I think that's a really, I think I'm going to have to do some work on that, because that's very powerful. And that's a lot of things that we're going through as a collective together. And I think that was actually the opportunity maybe to bring some of this stuff in a more large way, because people can relate to it. So that, I think that's a beautiful analogy, is somehow connecting people to that experience, because everyone experienced it.
absolutely. So that vulnerability, again, the education system, we have that programming of, yes, working remotely, yeah, you have access to internet now, you can be at home with your children, but that's just the programming of it, on the facade. Now what's inside is just everyone's shattered, nobody's speaking about it. So this is a beautiful area where what leads into your next weave of exploring that.
Yeah, I love that, because it is that there is that shattering that's happened for so many people, and the expectation that everyone's just supposed to get over it. Yet where's the I mean, that's like the source of all of our trauma across time as humanity, right there, is that, you know, like, hey, you were a refugee and you've experienced this trauma, and why are you complaining about it? And don't complain about it, and don't process it, and don't, you were a, you know, like, I just think of all of these different experiences where we're just expected to stuff our trauma down and the conversation isn't happening. And then we project that upon children as well. Like, wow, you experienced this traumatic thing. Let's definitely not process it. Yeah, so you're just opening up all kinds of educational opportunities there, Nazia, because I feel like there's so much to that. So how do you bring that into educational systems that have been functioning in very dysfunctional ways for a really long time? And, you know, that concept is like teacher as authority, as opposed to teacher as guide or facilitator, or, you know, it's just a different, I think philosophically, there's so much to that. And then it goes back to what Alicia was talking about with that concept of like, is there hope? Because the level of reform would have to be huge. One of the projects I'm working on is creating facilitated meets on different subjects like tarot and tea and self-care and healing hands, like where people would come in as at any level and be able to participate and learn what are the healing modalities that are available on this planet right now, and what are the, you know, like, what is this oracle thing that people keep talking about? What does it mean? Like, because so many people are curious, right? And so, and then how do you work in those high energies and having like a facilitator to help with that? Because I think one of our keys is tying into our intuition to do this healing, but how do people systematically do that? That becomes a really important key. And I think mothers know this immediately because that's how they work with babies. Babies can't talk, so they have to be intuitive. But you know, then of course there are the mothers that are perpetuating because they're wounded and doing all that, you know, like, so it's such a hard world we live in. So how to deliver something that brings all of those things together, I'm not totally sure. Not totally sure. But I'm working on it. I'm working on, you know, and that goes into like, do I want to be part of the problem or part of the solution? And if I see the problem, then I have to try to work on the solution. But so much of this comes into like, so how to ground that into something that is viable and usable by many people, and that it reaches people that it needs to reach. And I'm not sure how that's going to end up manifesting, but I feel very compelled to bring something in that's going to be meaningful. And it's exactly all the things we're talking about, like for mothers, for their children. And it really begins with women, and then it begins with healing, and it begins with, and then setting maybe a new standard for what healthy looks like. In that way, like, what is healthy learning and what is healthy teaching, and what is, you know, because that changes, I think, perception, and that changes the model.
So you're a creator of systems, okay? You're saying, okay, what I see is Shay or Indigo, and then tomorrow it's another name.
Yeah, I
But
know.
whatever, we're always, no, it's good because, you know, we're always, it's evolution. So new systems need to be created. Like, I remember when I was raising kids and there was a lot of like, okay, do you pull them out of the system? There's a lot of parents are, you know, getting fed up with certain things. And then you've got that whole homeschooling or alternative education movement going on. There are others who are supplementing and then doing their homework at home and trying to evolve as human beings at the same time, in parallel working with the system. Then you had other individuals like, let's say yourself, who were bringing in mindfulness into the classroom, yoga into the classroom, delivering these systems, or proposing them to the existing systems so that they could be integrated. Not everyone went on board, some did, and then, you know, stats were being given that, you know, this community that has incorporated yoga or mindfulness in the classroom, these are the results, right? Just today I had somebody message me and she said, I live in the Bronx and I would like to work with children who are affected by drugs and all of that kind of stuff going on there. And she works with children. So there's a lot of that too, like that hope that, you know, light work is working also, not giving up on the system, but working within the system and creating that change to whatever level, the shift.
Yeah, because
So
we
what-
can't
yeah.
ignore it. We can't
Right, we
ignore
can't
it.
ignore it.
It exists.
We can't. And we
And-
don't want to give up on all these individuals who are literally seeking that hope, and there's no alternative for them but to be put into a system that's created to create robots, maybe. But a person like you, okay, who's, you know, been around the world, has, you know, I'd say mashallah, right? You've done like a lot, you're doing the work, you're continuously evolving from so many different levels of awareness. People like you are so necessary. Now, when is your system coming out? And how can we support you in bringing that to whatever systems we can influence or we have connection with and do that? Like, how we'll do our part, but when are you doing your part?
So right now I'm working on a couple of different projects, including a priestess project, which I would love to do interviews. So that's a huge thing. And that's really about stepping into your sacred energy. And then the educational piece is probably going to turn into educational coaching. And so that's what I'm seeing as emerging at this time. And because of that, I feel like, you know, I'm not sure. And that's a really great question. I'd have to reflect on that because I don't have the product set up per se, but I'm trying to figure out how to create digital products that can allow me to go work with teachers. And oh, I have got to go, ladies. I appreciate so much of this. Has been wonderful. And I wish I had more time.
How can I, sorry, not how can I, thank you so much for participating. How can our listeners reach you if they, you know, want to get in contact with you?
You can reach me at, I think Instagram would probably be the best. So Alicia, if you could share that, that would
Sure.
be wonderful.
Perfect. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you
I
so
appreciate
much.
you all.
Been a
Thank you for
delight.
coming and being here and
Yeah.
holding space for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
So Louisa, we haven't done any penning prompts for this lovely session with Indigo. What is your recommendation?
Yeah, should we find a poem right now just to read and then reflect on? I can
Sure.
see if I can find something just
You're
on the
very
fly.
impromptu.
Yes. You can just keep talking if you like.
Yeah, I also noticed, and I wanted to mention this, that thanks to, I guess, those who have intended to do their part, okay, in their own evolution consciously. What's happening is that I'm seeing a trend where young individuals are working with the young. It's almost like those who were fortunate to have these teachers and guides, and in their journey of, you know, the institution or education, we're fortunate to have these inspiring adults, and they've had a positive experience or whatever experience. they themselves are taking a very strong initiative to work with people closer to their age range or their, yeah, basically. So there seems to be hope in that because I'm seeing a lot of that happening. And that way it's a closer age gap of influence rather than someone who's like 40 trying to work with younger minds, and then you have younger minds working with younger minds, and there's less of a gap, so more influence and more hope. Now I'll just stop right there. That was just an observation. Louisa has a poem.
Yeah, no, that was a good observation though, because I was also thinking about what Indigo was telling us about being, on the same level as the kids. I guess it comes down to what's an actual authority, what's something that gives, and I'm not talking about, the hierarchical authority, obviously. It's like, who is an authority that children would actually want to listen to and want to be guided by? That, I think you're right, like, there's probably such a gap in basically bridging the younger generation with the older one. And then there are people who are young at heart, although they're 70, 80, 90, and they could impart really valuable wisdom for the young ones. But I'm sure there's a great need for that true connection and guidance, and yeah, that's obviously something that requires introspection and healing from oneself, from the person who is supposed to give that guidance. And yeah, it was very, very interesting to hear, and wish we would have had more time. I'm sure there would have been even more questions, but I have a poem on the theme, unless there's someone who has something, to reflect before we pen. Right. So something that just popped up on this theme when I was searching now is a poem by Rumi, and it's called Two Kinds of Intelligence. There are two kinds of intelligence. One acquired, as a child in school memorizes facts and concepts from books and from what the teacher says, collecting information from the traditional sciences as well as from the new sciences. With such intelligence, you rise in the world. You get ranked ahead or behind others in regard to your competence in retaining information. You get ranked ahead or behind others in regard to your competence in retaining information. You stroll with this intelligence in and out of fields of knowledge, getting always more marks on your preserving tablets. There's another kind of tablet, one already completed and preserved inside you, a spring overflowing its spring box, a freshness in the center of the chest. This other intelligence does not turn yellow or stagnate. It's fluid, and it doesn't move from outside to inside through conduits of plumbing learning. The second knowing is a fountainhead from within you moving out.
So that's the poem. Thank you. It's just so beautiful.
So how long should we give it for some reflective penning? 5 minutes? Sure. Okay. Okay, I think we've had our 5 minutes. Hope everyone has had some time to write. Is there someone who would want to share? Go first.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
I have one. Um, to hear my voice has to begin within me, knowing oneself emotionally. To hear parental voice have to begin with thee, both consciously and subconsciously. Immaturely emotional is within every individual. Immature emotional parents, I relieve you from me.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Mehtab, do you want me to read yours out loud? Okay. So Mehtab writes, as much as intelligence is influences, mind and heart plays a part. As much as there might be a reservoir of eternal treasure, an external influence opens the heart. To say we love a dive deep in sea and remain shouldn't be an excuse to avoid the breath and light at the shore. Well, thank you, Mehtab. Nazia or Alicia, would one of you want to share? Shall I read yours too, Alicia?
I can read it. I was just suggesting nausea.
Okay. I thought you were like, yes, yes.
No, no.
I saw that. Okay, Bismillah, it's the Azan right now. What is your innate tablet, a gift from birth, of your journeys through primordial times? Come, stand and rise, for for you are the ark of the covenant in the motion of now. Let us take our sacred pause and listen to you, so we can then stand up and rise and speak too, one by one, our innate tablets, and hold the warm scent of the loaf prepared for our feast that is already on this table, the sumptuous feast of the Ruh. As we break the bread, soaked into each other, from each other into our tummies, and into each other's mouths, now we can truly rest. Complete.
Okay, I will try to share mine here amidst the lessons of my teacher here on the floor, the little teacher here. Let's see. You built me a ladder out of broken pieces, metal scraps, cement blocks, the odd piece of wood that you had found and gathered. You had climbed it yourself and hurt yourself on rusty nails while climbing. I told you I'd rather walk up the hill instead on the soft grass, albeit stony, albeit muddy, albeit the longer way up, it seemed the safer way, and the path trodden by so many before me was still visible beneath the overgrowth. You built me a ladder I rejected. You sacrificed for me and were perhaps rightfully offended. I never rejected you. Do you want to share, Alicia?
Yes, I can share. I have hope in the new children, the children of today, yesterday, and tomorrow. I have hope for a new world, a shift, beauty redefined as we move through this tunnel of darkness, entering into the light, which was there prior to the tunnel, and after the tunnel, I have hope.
Thank you. What a delightful way to end, with a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes, and yeah, just entered Mecca. There is hope.
There is hope indeed.
Yeah. So that basically concludes our Divaan for this week.
Please post your pennings on the group, those of you who are there, so that those who were not here can read them, and also we can, return to them and reflect.
We shall. So we thank everybody here who has made the effort to show up. Your presence is a healing to each and every one of us. We thank Indigo for her light and her wisdom bites. We haven't had enough, but we can always connect to her once again
And
through
Alicia
technology.
will share
Yeah,
the technology
yeah,
nuggets.
Exactly. And well, yes, and we will have another session next month. So we look forward to that, and we shall connect. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for joining.
Peace, love, and salams.
Thank you.
Thank you.